sort of strategy to get there. And I have to have some kind of outline and steps and how I see that happening. So at the end of the day, how do you see that happening for you? And what's your strategy? What's your mission? What's your vision? So the concept of the S effect is just that. The S effect at Wierman Media is the way of turning speed into your ally versus your enemy. Because a lot of us, speed is our enemy. And then 2, understanding that attention is the currency of business. And then once I am at the intersection of culture and attention, understanding that how I'm going to leverage that presence. So how are you leveraging your online marketing campaign, and how are you leveraging your online presence? So a big part of this story about how you leverage your online marketing campaign comes back to storytelling and understanding the narrative in which you want to tell and the narrative in which you want to share. So I believe that storytelling is the game in 2020 with business or brands or even leadership. My story I touch on a lot is my experience and my humanistic living experiences, because that opens me up to connect to more of my audience as well as more of other human beings, because I'm speaking to human beings at the end of the day, whether they're owners of a Fortune 5000 company, whether they're SMB, small business owners, whether they're students, whether they are high schoolers, whether they are older folks. I'm speaking to other humans. So my concept is, okay, how can I connect and strike a chord with that audience? So once you understand that, you need to know your audiences. You need to be able to contextualize and understand them. So a big part of this is not just about dropping bombs on people. It's about literally scaling the unscalable and trying to understand and relate to people and connect with them. That's why when I have conversations with guys like Garrick Wick, shout out to Garrick, I'm trying to understand and build relationships. Amanda Don, I'm trying to build a relationship. Let's see, Clayton Michael, I'm trying to build a relationship. I've literally spent time with people I'm down to build relationships. I'm here in the Wierman Media studios, and unfortunately, a lot of people, they're not willing to invest in relationships and spend time and energy with others. But there's nowhere more where it's more rational and practical to build relationships and scale them than online currently. The most practical and unpractical things before have become practical due to online presence. So if you're a brand or a business now and you understand, okay, obscurity is my enemy and attention is the currency. So then once you do understand that, you need to have a narrative you want to tell. You need to have a story that you have outlined, that you want to tell the world or portray behind your brand. What is your brand story? Because the simpler you can make it and the more humanistic you can make it, the easier it is to connect to others. This is why I'm a strong believer in leadership branding, because it forces me to bring value to others. It forces me to lean into my experiences, my failures, my faults, more than my successes. And then I can connect and empathize with other humans, and then I can also touch on my successes. But because ego is the enemy, I've tried growing as I get older at 29 to focus on the faults and the flaws and the failures. The faults, the flaws, and the failures. Because then that opens me up more to connect with others, because they see I'm being authentic and vulnerable. Because a big part of the game of storytelling is being authentic and transparent and vulnerable. So that's why I talk a lot about my brain surgery and addiction and struggles as such as my mom dying and having the heroin addiction and having brain surgery and so forth. I've also had some successes, but I try to be humble and lean into my failures, because that's where my connections are, and that's where the most of my value actually has come from, is my struggles and my battles. The losses, like Gary Vee says, are where the strength comes from. I derive most of my knowledge and strength from my losses and battles. So once I understand that's my narrative, I'm using leadership branding. So then it makes it easier to share a story and be on a podcast and talk more, because I can lean into my leadership story side, or I can lean into the business strategy side. I love business science. I love talking about business. So then I started a podcast. So a podcast is a great platform that is culture relevant and going to bring attention and culture to you instantly. If you fire up a podcast tomorrow, there is nothing more powerful than in firing up a podcast and inviting your target audience onto your podcast. It's going to be hard at first to get guests. I know, I'm doing it. But you can at least have your own show and talk about your business, talk about your strategy, talk about your experience and story. So once you do start a podcast, that's the key, because that is the top piece of content. That is one of your macro pieces of content that you're going to use to leverage your online presence. So if I think about being online and being culture relevant and attention relevant, a podcast is like number one in the game right now. There's not much else you can do that is more relevant, more culture hip, more frequently downloaded or listened to, then the new thing moving forward is the sound age. So the sound age moving forward is going to be when we can order something from our shirt and talk into our watch, or talk to our fridge, or talk to our toaster. We're going to be using our voice because it's the fastest way, friction-free. It's the easiest. They're going to make devices or be able to take orders on demand from our voices like our cell phones already do, like Siri and so forth. So it's the sound age. So once you realize that the podcast is very culture relevant piece of content, then you can lead into a Q&A show with your podcast episodes, and then you have 2 shows that are your macro pillar pieces of content that you then record the audio, the visual, and the written word of, and then you have all your micro pieces of content that you can release and contextualize for the other channels that you're going to release them on. So a big part of this, though, to understanding how to leverage your online marketing campaign is understanding that you have to have a strategy. You have to make speed your ally, because then through testing, measuring, and developing, having average and mediocre outputs, you generate more consistent and better outputs. And then through that speed, testing, measuring, and developing, always being qualitative and measuring the data, measuring the success and the improvement, then you can move forward via the feedback of the content, via the interaction of the content, and lean into the content that has the better feedback, that has more interactions, and the consumer and audience is telling you naturally is what they want to see. Then you're giving them what they want. You're bringing them value, you're bringing them insight, and you're bringing them transparent storytelling about you and your brand and your business. And then they can relate more, and they can connect you at the intersection of culture and attention. Once I'm at the intersection of culture and attention, and I'm sharing my story in a powerful, authentic, vulnerable fashion, people see I'm being real, that I'm a human, and then they relate to me, and then they can understand me more, and then they opens me up to connecting with them. And then maybe I can schedule a Zoom meeting, and then maybe I can scale that into a personal meeting, and then we're doing business. Next thing you know, we're doing business together, or we're just developing a relationship together, because relationships are the most valuable asset in life, period. My most valuable relationship in my life has been my brother, Isaiah, Isaac Wierman. You know him. He was former co-host on the show. And Solomon, and my dad, and Kim Duffett. People have been the most valuable in my life. Indira Benitez. There's a long list of them. Richard Kosasic in Hawaii. So at the end of the day, how are you leveraging your online marketing campaign comes back to knowing your narrative, having a strategy to propel your business to the intersection of culture and attention, and then once you know the narrative, sharing it in an authentic, vulnerable fashion at the intersection of culture and attention via culture-relevant content avenues. So culture-relevant content avenues are like a podcast, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. These channels are culture-relevant content channels. Culture-relevant content channels are where you then want to leverage your campaign, your online marketing campaign. The problem is there's a lot of people that currently are not even present online. So in 2020, sorry, if you're not present online, you're going to have issues moving forward, especially as COVID continues to progress and the movement and merge to a more digital, reclusive living style and a more digital life, where we've never seen a life that's more digital, arguably ever before. Currently today, November 24th, whatever it is, 2020, it is the most it's the most digital culture we've ever seen. As far as culture and digital, the merging of the two, and digital culture and culture digital, it's never been more digital. We've never seen a more digital world, and especially when it comes to business, marketing, and advertising. So at the end of the day, you need to start to lean into that. And if you don't, this is where the innovator's dilemma talks about technology causing companies to fail. Because if you're never going to say you're going to be flexible, agile, and innovate or pivot, then you're going to have issues in business, because the time's going to come where you're going to disintegrate. You're not going to work. Your business, your model, and your concepts are going to become old, out of fashion, and out of date, or something like a pandemic's going to come and put you out of business. It's the reality. Pandemics happen. So once you understand and look back on the course of this pandemic, it comes down to how are you leveraging your online marketing campaign, and understanding that this all comes back to being flexible, fluid, agile, and so forth. Because if a business is flexible, fluid, and agile, and it has perspective, it's always testing, measuring, and developing, auditing, and inspecting, it's gaining perspective and awareness via audit and inspection, and understanding that they need to constantly be testing, measuring, and developing. And when you're doing that and you're auditing and inspecting, you're gaining perspective and awareness. And when you have perspective and awareness, it opens you up to the ability to pivot and see things coming and understand that, oh, this is coming. So at the beginning of this, if you're someone that maybe would have instantly saw this coming, you could have maybe said, okay, this is happening, and let's just fluidly and flexibly switch and change. It all comes back to understanding and having perspective about what's happening and what's going on. Perspective and awareness is the most powerful tool in business, and understanding what's happening and seeing what's coming. So nothing better in business than understanding how to leverage your online marketing campaign in 2020 and understanding how to share that in a powerful, authentic fashion via the narrative you wish to share. If you're someone that's not comfortable with sharing your leadership brand, then focus on the business brand side and just focus on sharing the story of your brand. Is that Grace? Grace Rivard? Oh, it's Garrick. What's up, Garrick? And then focus on sharing your brand, because if you share your brand story and you share it in a powerful, authentic fashion, you're going to then be opening yourself up to connect to your audience. A big part of what I'm talking about with communication and leveraging your online marketing campaign comes back to understanding and knowing what the narrative is that you want to tell. A lot of people, they're not authentic enough or vulnerable enough to share their narrative online at scale, or that's from the leadership, the individual lens. That's how I do it. Or even understand that they can just do that with their business brand. But what's your brand's narrative? Knowing your narrative as a brand or a business or an individual is essential to understand how you're going to share that and how you're going to connect to others and relate to them and so forth. Because being able to connect and empathize with your audience and understand what their wants, needs, and desires are is a big part of understanding how to leverage your online marketing campaign. And once you are present online and at the intersection of culture and attention, trying to connect and empathize and relate and build relationships with your audience and understanding what they're about is a big part of this game. And that all starts with knowing your narrative. Knowing your narrative is the number one step to start then moving forward and having a podcast and starting a podcast and then sharing that with your audience and your consumers at scale. So the intellectual value, though, I want to focus on with this is understanding that attention and culture are all present online. And if you are someone that's trying to do anything, you need attention. And then you need to understand it's a game of communication of your story, whether it is the story that you're trying to tell is a solution to a problem, it's a business, a brand, an idea, or a concept, then you need to have a way of sharing that and articulating that story that you want to share, and then propelling that out there into the world and sharing it at scale. And what I mean by at scale is at the top of the funnel. It's where everyone's present, the culture and attention. Their cell phones and social media apps, cultural relevant content channels. That is things like a podcast, social media, digital outlets, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, all the channels, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, all of them. That's where you want to share that story. And then it then becomes how you're testing, measuring, and developing, optimizing, growing, and going. And then making speed your ally via doing, removing ego and the fear of being inexact, and being open to inexact, average, below average outputs of content that you then continue to consistently create, improve, test, measure, and develop, and measure the interaction rate, measure via the feedback, and then focus and lean into what's working and start to minimize what isn't, and devoting your resources, time, and energy to the things that are working within that space. It's a lot easier once you have a team, but I'm focusing on the concepts that I've learned from someone that's having lots of success. And in 2020, if you want to have success in whatever it is you're doing, you must have communication with your content. Communication is the game, content is the name. So how are you using content to communicate at scale? You're sharing a powerful, authentic, fictional story in a vulnerable, creative, cultural, relevant fashion. How are you doing that with your business or brand, or your leadership, your mission, your vision, your concept, your beliefs, your political stances? Whatever it is, if you have a political belief, if you have a political stance, shout out to Terry. One of my friends, Terry, always has these political beliefs and stances, but it's time to go out there and do something about it. Start a podcast, whatever it is, whatever your energy is behind, whatever your belief is behind, whatever your vision is, your goals, your missions, you need to have ability to communicate that at scale online in a digital world that's never been more digital, and understand how to leverage that presence. It comes back to how you're sharing your narrative, knowing the narrative you want to share, and simplifying that narrative, and then sharing it consistently at scale in a creative, cultural, relevant fashion, in a transparent, vulnerable fashion, so that you can connect to others, relate to others, and start to scale and build relationships. And then via that, you can then move into to understanding the wants, needs, and desires, measuring the feedback, measuring the interaction, and understand that that's the data. You can start to develop metrics. You can develop metrics for anything. It's about being scientific. And that is a big part of the S effect. That's a big part of this whole game, is the S effect. And the Wierman Media model is about everything that is talked about. It's about using these concepts, these strategies to propel your business and brand closer to the intersection of culture and attention via brand development, brand trust, brand loyalty, and community development. That's where a lot of this happens. That's where a lot of this stuff occurs, is online in 2020 on digital avenues. So that's what it's about, and that's what I love talking about this stuff. I love business science. I love the science behind business, and I don't think a lot of people understand how scientific business is. Business is one of the most spiritual and scientific processes that exist. It's about being of service, sharing intellectual value, which I'm trying to do regularly with you on this podcast, and then it's about being scientific in how you operate and move forward, testing, measuring, developing, and improving and growing and optimizing and evolutional growth, how you evolutionize, how you optimize. How are you evolutionizing your growth as a business or an individual? I love growing. I love being evolution. I love optimizing. I think I want to be a better version of myself day in, day out, and see the growth. And by doing things that scare me and challenge me like this, it forces me to learn. It forces me to remain the student. It forces me to remain humble, and it forces me to always be learning, growing, and going, and trying to share that with others. So today's episode was about how you leverage your online marketing campaign via the intersection of culture and attention with communication via cultural relevant content channels such as a podcast, social media channels, and etc. And the critical point of that is knowing the narrative you wish to share and sharing that narrative in a cultural relevant, transparent, authentic, vulnerable fashion that propels your business or brand closer to the intersection of culture and attention. Once again, at Wierman Media, it is never right, it is never wrong, it is simply our perspective.